In this video we are going to talk about the Linux file system. So a couple of basic information. The Linux file system is a hierarchical structure which is formed in the form of a single directory tree. At the top of this directory tree is the root, which is also represented by a slash. After the root, so exactly under it, you will find directories and files. So from this standpoint of what objects you find in the file system, Linux is not that different than Windows. You have folders or directories and you have files of different types. And here is a very simplified way of seeing how the Linux file structure is made. So at the top you have always the root, which I guess you could consider like a folder or a container of sorts. And exactly under this root you will find your top level folders like etc and bin, and you can also have different files. And here are a couple of directories that you will find exactly under root. And these are pretty much the ones that you will come in contact with a lot. First is etc, and this directory contains configuration data for or configuration files for applications and for the system itself. You also have bin, and this contains binary and executable files like applications, for example. Then you have the var folder, and as the name would suggest, this folder contains variable data like logs. Dev is very interesting for a Windows admin because the dev folder contains device files. Devices being monitors, mice, keyboards, and so on, which I guess if you are only a Windows administrator it would seem strange. But since in Linux everything is a file, even devices, you can find them under this dev directory as files. Next is the home directory, and this contains the home directories for all the users on this server that have such a directory. And we also have an interesting one called TMP. This is a temporary directory which really is temporary because in most Linux distributions this is emptied upon server startup. So if you put something in this folder and then you restart the server, chances are big that it will be deleted. Now let's talk about something that at least for me was a little confusing being a Windows admin when I started learning Linux. And that is how we treat disks and partitions as in regards to accessing them. In Windows, each partition is given a drive letter, and this means that each partition is in this way the root of its file system. So if you have the C partition, all the files and folders will be under C, that is on that partition. If you have D, then everything will be under D. If you want to access something on your DVD drive and it's mounted with E, you would say I want to go to e/setup.exe. Now since Linux has a single file structure per operating system, where the slash is the top of this structure, the abstraction that Windows uses does not work. So because of this in Linux there's another approach. You mount the partitions, the DVD drives and the USB devices that you connect to your computer or server to directories on the file system. And here's how this would look. So we have the root, like we talked about. Under the root we have a directory called mnt, which stands for mount. And now the magic happens. You can make under mnt whatever directories you like, for example USB 1 and DVD 1. And when you plug in a USB device, you can tell it that it should be mounted on this directory. So if you would like to access setup.exe on the USB device, you would tell it that you want to access /mnt/usb1/setup, and that's it. As compared to Windows, where you would say I want to access g:/setup.exe. Now, rather than me just talking all day about this, I think it's better that we start and see a couple of simple commands that we can use to navigate the file system and be better acquainted with how it works. And the first command I want to show you is a command that shows you where you are in the file system at the moment. And it's called pwd for print working directory. And we are in /home/user100. We are in the user's home drive. If we want to go one directory up, so if we would want to be in /home, we can use cd and 2 dots. CD stands for change directory, and I think you should be familiar with it also from the Windows operating system. And you see that now also the prompt has changed here, and we are in the home directory. And I will also prove it. You can see home. If you want to go to the root of the file system, you can just cd to /, since that is the root. And now we are at the top of the file system structure. If we give it a pwd, we see that we don't have anything else except root in our current path. From anywhere you are in the file system, if you want to go back to your home drive, you can just type cd and it will take you back. And now you see we should be back in a /home/user100. And we are. Now let's go a little further with exploring the file system, and I'll show you a cool command called ls, which you can use to list the files and directories that you have in your current path. So if we type ls when we are on the root of the file system, we get all the primary folders and the files that we have there. And you see there are a couple. If you want to see more information and also the hidden files and directories, you can use -la. And this gives you a much more verbose view with a lot more info. And it also shows you all the items that have a dot in front of them, which typically would be considered hidden. You can also use ls to find more specific information. So we already got a lot of information from this prompt, and a little later in the video I will explain to you what each of these mean. But if you would want for a file, for example, to get the last access time, you would use ls-lu and give it the file name. And now we get the day, the month, and also the time that this file was last accessed. If you want the creation time, ls-lc, and you get the following time, which you can see it's also the time that you get when you run ls without anything else. Now if you want to get info about a specific item, like a file or a directory, you can also use the file tool and then specify a name. For example, file etc would give us info about the etc directory, and it tells us that it is a directory. If we run this command for swap.img, which is a file, it tells us it's a regular file. And of course, so you can do this for anything you want. For example, bin. I can show you bin. You see this special notation. It tells us that this is a symbolic link. And in Linux, a symbolic link is similar or somewhat similar to a shortcut in Windows, meaning that the bin directory actually points to this one in reality. Okay, so let's go back to our home drive, and I'll show you a couple of commands that you can also use to manipulate the file system. The first one, makedir or mkdir, is used to create new directories. So now we should have test1 in our home, and we do. Now if you want to create test2/test, but test2 does not exist, you can use -p and it will create all the folders in the path that do not exist. So make dir. Now if we try ls, we see that we have test2, and if we try ls test2, we see that in it we have the directory test. If you want to create an empty file or change the timestamp of an existing file, you can use the touch command. So we give it a file, and now if we try an ls test2, you see that we have a file.txt. Let's also see how to remove directories. If we want to remove an empty directory, so it has to be empty for this to work, use the rmdir command and give it the directory name or the path to the directory. And you see that it's deleted. But if we would try the same command on the test2 folder which has other items in it, you see that it doesn't work. For this to work, we have to use rm-rf. And be very careful when you use this command, because it will delete this folder. If you have something important, it's gone. And you see that now this folder is also deleted, and we are left again with nothing in our home directory. So that was a quick view of how to navigate and manipulate the file system on a Linux machine. Now let's talk a little about what we saw. So first, the primary colors that you will see in the ls command are dark blue, which represents a directory, light blue, which represents a symbolic link, which, like I said previously, it is very similar to a shortcut in Windows. Then you have also the color green, which represents an executable file or like a program and a script. And you have also white, which means usually normal text files. So any file that is not executable or of any special sort will be in white. Now let's also analyze what all these things in ls actually mean. So when you run ls on an object, you will get a line, and each item represents something. As you see here, I marked the first character, and this represents the object type. As you see here, this is dark blue, so this is a directory, and it is also marked as a directory because of this D. If it would have had a dash, it would have been a normal file, and L would be for a symbolic link. Now the next block of characters represents the permissions on the item in question. Regarding permissions, we are going to talk about them in a later video in this series. The next character is the number of symbolic links that point to this directory. The next one represents the owner of the directory or the file, so the user account that has owner access on that item. And this other string represents a special group that has file access specifically granted to the directory or file. We are going to see how this is actually used in a later video, but the reason these are the same is because usually in Linux, when you create a user, it will also create a group with the same name as the user. Now moving on, we have the size of the item, and in our case this is only 4 kilobytes because this is in bytes. Then we have the last modified date. And last but not least, of course, the name of the item itself. And this was it for a look at the Linux file system. If you enjoyed the video, please like it and share it. Consider subscribing if you want to be notified when I put out new videos. And thanks a lot for watching.